You okay if I'm drinking coffee?
Absolutely. Actually, even though we're a world apart, Mark, I'm having an afternoon cup of coffee and you have your 8 a.m.
Nice.
cup of coffee. So, welcome,
Yeah.
man. I'm excited to have this conversation. We were just chatting a little bit before I hit the record button about how you found the Meaning Project podcast. Share that story again really quick. I think it's great. Because it ties directly
Yeah,
into,
okay.
your work.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me, firstly. Really appreciate you making the time to have the conversation. But yeah, so basically, like I said, we came across your podcast because we were looking for people that had alignment with our own project at the Tattoo Pathway. And myself and our lead research, Taylor, were reading Frankel's Man's Search for Meaning. I'd read it a long time ago, but I found another edition of it at this bookshop in town, and it had the logotherapy, I guess, breakdown in the back,
Hmm.
which I hadn't gone into before. And at the Tattoo Pathway, we say if you want a meaningful tattoo, you need to be living a meaningful life. I'm going through the notes here, and out of that book, it says, if you have a why, or he who has a why to live for can bear almost any how,
Yep.
right? And so like there's a very like simple layer there within tattooing. It can be a challenge physically.
Hmm.
You can get excited about an idea, and then you're on the table and your skin's getting opened up. You know, and a lot of the time you sit there and you're wondering why you did it. Uh, so on a real surface level, that sort of points to why we thought it was aligned to have a conversation with yourself.
Hmm.
That being the background that you have, and then for ourselves, trying to instill more meaning into people's practice with the tattoo, so that it's not such a flippant or a whimsical process.
Hmm. I think that's fascinating, and I'm glad you did find me. I can't believe, as I said earlier, we are literally worlds apart. It is 8 a.m. where you're at in Australia and 3 p.m. in the afternoon here. And by the power of this great technology, we get to have an amazing conversation. So I'm curious. I've always seen tattooing as something that should have meaning. I know when people come into my office, I ask them, in our first session. I said, tell me about the tattoos you have. Tell me about your ink. What's going on there? And it's, I've assumed there should be meaning behind a tattoo, and many people don't. There's, I happen to be out with my friends and we all got this, or um, just different reasons that maybe, well, aren't necessarily aligned with Frankel's idea of meaning. So, what,
Yeah.
where does this work come from for you?
Okay. Um, yeah, I'll get to the question where it comes from for me, but I think what you're pointing to there is like a lot of people just have a superficial meaning,
Mm,
because it's like obviously there's a meaning, right?
I would think so.
But a lot of people just don't get to the substance, or to something that's actually going to carry them through their life, or sort of withstand the growth that they're going to go through. That's kind of the most common thing where something starts to lack meaning, or people become aware of the surface level interaction they've had, is they sort of outgrow, they move away from it, or they change, and it no longer has the legs that it needs to keep up with them and what's happening in their life. So I mean, I guess I've just arrived here as a result of paying attention to what I'm doing and being on my own sort of journey, I guess. So I've been working with people and tattooing them for 16 years.
Mhm.
And probably around 12-ish years ago was when I started to question the depth of my own practice, and the practice at large as well, correlating with just questioning different things in my life as well. Um, Looking around and going like, is this the environment I want to be in? Are these the people I want to hang around? Those sorts of questions. And what's the meaning of life? All
Mhm.
the big ones. Uh, the existential vacuum, I suppose you'd say. It's like, not that I was stuck in it, I wasn't in a rut, but I was definitely in like that sort of waking up and starting to question things. And um, at that point, naturally, I started questioning what I was doing with tattooing,
Hmm.
why I was doing it, and then also um, like a very close observation of what I was actually doing to people, because I wanted what I was doing to be something that was like, I guess, contributing to their story in a good way, you know. Um, so it's been a gradual thing. It wasn't like just an overnight realization. There was like a cluster of different things that played out back then, and that I've sort of gradually, I guess, uh, matured into. Spent time researching. Definitely lots of like acute experiences as well,
Hmm.
having different teachers and having different going through different processes. With tattooing, there's a lot of like traditional cultures that understand its place and its role uh, really in depth. They've got real intimate relationships of using tattooing through time to create meaningful events. To create rites of passage and initiation. And um, back in the day, you could imagine it's like before the internet and before this kind of like oversaturation and flooding of influence. Is going like to someone within their society and just asking for the most current pop culture image tattooed on their arm, right?
Hmm.
There'd be a very different pathway to receive something, and then the content of what they got also would be far more relevant and correlate to their life, in a way that usually the tattoo would become some type of guiding star for them. Um, but then also the physical ordeal is usually something that they would, I guess, leverage for a sort of psychological leap, let's say, from you know like a more adolescent stage of thinking into a healthy adult psychology or something like that.
So, like you
Um,
said, in some ways, a rite of passage into adulthood.
yeah, yeah, a lot of the time it'd be used that way.
In
Yeah.
your work, I am curious, what cultures have you found that really get it, that understand tattooing and how, well, I guess that's maybe even the question too, is what have you found in different cultures and what does it mean for a culture to understand tattooing and use it in a meaningful way?
Yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, today, it's more like who's retained it today.
Mm.
Which groups of people have retained it is kind of where it's at. But if we look back, um, every single nation of people in like a non-globalized and isolated cultural context used tattooing. If they didn't use tattooing, they used scarring,
Mm.
which is the same, has the same back end, like in terms of its utility and what's happening to the body. Um, or like even things like in Australia, they'll knock teeth out at a certain age. So there's like these things where it's like there's a physical change.
Hmm.
So like you can see and perceive yourself differently, and so can people around you, and then they allocate something to that change, right?
Hmm.
But yeah, so tattooing has existed for all people pretty much, um, and we can like hypothesize those beginnings, and it's like maybe it was um, everyone would be like doing things around a fire, cooking on fire, using fire to like change different things, and so that's where you get one of the elements, right, which is like soot.
Hmm.
The other element's something sharp enough to cut your skin.
Hmm.
We've been using that for a long time as well. Arrowheads and blades and rocks and knives. And then there's those two things coming together. So like cutting the skin and the soot. So it's like there could be a very practical way that man at some point has cut their hand, let's say preparing food or something around a fire, and ended up with a mark. potentially.
Hmm.
But if we look at all cultures that still retain it, to circle back, that retain some type of um, belief system or way for their people and their stories that involves tattooing, they'll have some mythological origin story for
Hmm.
tattooing. And it's always linked to a supernatural layer. So it's not, they don't go like, oh yeah, we tattoo ourselves because we accidentally stubbed our toe by the fire. You know, the Maori culture is probably like one of the strongest representatives
Hmm.
currently. I mean, the whole sort of islander region, and they're all linked. When you start like actually speaking to people, it's like the heads of all of these cultural practices. You know, the people that sort of like have the most information, or actually, I guess, viewed as sort of being the the wisest, or the people practicing it in the most knowledgeable way. They've all learned from the same sort of lines, you know. And I think it's because there was lots of ruptures in cultures during like colonization and stuff. So things were like literally lost, uh, but it's all sort of like revived and picked up through the craft of making the tools in this old way. So like I get tattooed in New Zealand by someone who his teachers learnt from someone from Samoa, where I
Hmm.
think it didn't stop there. So they continued making the tools. They haven't stopped making the tools for however many thousands of years. And so I think the practitioners in Samoa were sort of like open enough and saw the kind of necessity of the practice, and passed that information back to like the Hawaiian culture, and then the Hawaiians passed it back to the Filipinos.
Hmm.
So it's like there's this revival that's happened within the cultures, which is really beautiful to see. But even in like where my background's from, which is like I was born in Australia, but my heritage, a lot of it comes from like former Yugoslavia. So I've been looking at all this like sort of old Slavic sort of prehistory stuff, and it's like they were doing it too. It's like all the Viking stuff as well, and
Hmm.
um, yeah, anywhere you look, really, there's some really sort of established archaeologists and anthropologists that have gone into it. Lars Krutak and that they've done their digging, but it seems to be everywhere. It's like it's a very natural thing
Hmm.
to mark the body. It
Hmm.
seems, because it's happened in such early times, and even now without as rich of a context. Interestingly enough, you look around and so many people just are doing it. There's this impulse to tattoo themselves.
Hmm.
But the difference is today, it's like the access is so high, and the meaning entry level is so everyday and whimsical that it's like, why not go and get a SpongeBob tattoo? You know?
Yeah, you would guess that might lose meaning in time eventually.
Maybe, yeah,
Yeah.
maybe. Who
So
knows?
what is the message of your work at your website? Some interesting people and what you're doing there. I love your story of, I think you talked about a difficult apprenticeship complete with bikers or something like that. What was
Right.
your
Yeah, yeah.
apprenticeship? Is that what drove you to do this kind of research or?
I guess it was one element.
Hmm.
Initially that environment was simply getting my foot in the door. So when I started, which would have been about 2006, 2007, the industry had a really had a hold from the biker industry.
Mm.
There weren't any shops that weren't affiliated within the Sydney region anyway. I know it might have been different down in Melbourne and definitely overseas,
Hmm.
but in Sydney or New South Wales, um, every shop was either run by bikers or
Wow.
being extorted by them,
Okay.
in a way that was like, it was just accepted. It was like if you had a biker store, you're probably paying rent to your landlord and paying a commission to a criminal organization.
Interesting.
And
And so that I'm
if you
guessing,
didn't,
go ahead.
yeah, you go.
Well, I'm just thinking that that must have given the industry not the most positive name,
Right,
right? I can see
right.
how all of a sudden now tattooing is a criminal thing or done by, that not good for the industry image, that's for sure.
Yeah, yeah, totally. Yeah, I mean, so since then, that was probably like a turning point when I started getting involved. And just to like, I guess, highlight that in sort of the psyche of where I am. And I think globally it started to change then too, because I wasn't interested in tattoos. Like through high school, I was like, yeah, nah. I was drawing a lot. I remember
Hmm.
drawing tattoos for like friends in the classroom and stuff.
Hmm.
Like one of my mates, one of the first people I tattooed as well, Dale Sullivan. Love the guy. He got one at 16 because his folks were like, yeah, you can get tattooed. And I went with him into this really old school shop in Sydney and been there for like 50 years type of thing. And he got the Australian flag with his last name Sullivan under it, you know. And I was like, I'd never get tattooed.
Hmm.
I had no interest. And I also sort of associated tattoos. No one in my family had tattoos. So like my programming was that tattoos are for like rougher people,
Hmm. Sure.
right?
Hmm.
Um, and but I started my apprenticeship as the result of influence through a screen. If I reflect on it, I'm like, it's probably because the TV shows started coming out, right? There was like Miami Ink was the first one.
Right.
Remember with Army James, and it was
Hmm.
like there was that cool intro song, and there was the Funny Apprentice and Chris
Yeah.
Garver, like he was like the kind of like intellect and really knew what he was doing. So there was like an influence of TV that had never been there that I think started to pave the way of tattoos aren't just for like rough people,
Hmm.
um, and started to, I guess, wash the stereotype out. And I think since then till now, we've gone through this, yeah, this like filtering or washing out of the stereotype,
Hmm.
but it's also washed out all of the really valuable side of things. It's like TV is kind of a bit of that clown stage as well, right?
Hmm.
It's not very real. A lot of it's like people are acting and they're having to sort of like over amplify different aspects, and then people sort of lose contact with reality, right?
Yeah.
So there's a layer of it becoming like devalued in the process of becoming accepted.
Hmm.
That sort of goes on. And there was also a filtration that happened for it to get to that stereotype in the first place. So it's like my generation is going from the stereotype of tattoos are bad to tattoos are for everybody.
Hmm.
But to get to tattoos are bad, like we said, if they started in a place where like tattoos are sacred and inherently meaningful, to get to tattoos are bad is also a step. And so that probably happened like 300 years ago. So it's like everyone's tattooing all over the world, right? And
Hmm.
they're at these beautiful stages where the tattoos are like an intricate thread of their culture's
Right.
nest,
Right.
right? And the nests all sort of start getting ripped apart.
Through
And then
colonization.
the right,
Okay.
it's like major influence. If we look at like Columbus and you know even through the Pacific, you got Captain James Cook, right? That came over to Australia. So he actually put the word tattoo in the dictionary, right? Because he was in Tahiti
Hmm.
in like 1700s, and they use an onomatopoeia of tatau, because they tap. And so he goes, well, a tattoo is ink in the skin, and that's how we get our definition. right? So everyone goes, oh, tattoo. I know what a tattoo is. It's ink in the skin. Where it's like, if you look at the language prior to the 1700s in all of the different cultures, they don't talk about tattoos as being ink in the skin. They have definitions that talk about the process of what's happening to the person. So there's a lot of talk about it being sort of like record keeping and remembering and navigational in terms of it's something that guides the person or helps them in their life.
Hmm.
So it's a very different definition even. And so like to get from that place to tattoos are bad was tattooing being sort of abolished, repressed, stopped. And then so you can if you think of it like a charge, right? Like something has a polarity, it's really good.
Hmm.
And then it goes like it's bad and it gets kind of it gets misevaluated in this process, like everything kind of did at that time. It's like, well, these people are bad. They're doing things we don't understand. And it's like you can kind of empathize to a degree. It's like there's these voyages and they're probably like on some type of sacred duty, so they're indoctrinated into something as well. They think what they're doing is meaningful.
Right.
And they're coming across practices they don't understand, people they don't understand. They're probably scared.
Hmm.
And there was still things happening as well. It's like they were still coming across things like, human sacrifice, for
Right.
example. So they're going like, well, they're killing people. Not that they weren't. So
Mm.
you can see how confusing this whole thing's probably going on at that
Sure.
time. Um, but then they've gone like, so tattooing's bad. So we'll stop them from doing that.
Hmm.
We'll stop them from doing their processes of connecting to their gods or whatever, and their people, and we'll try so all that stuff happened. So it's gone from tattooing's good to a process of tattooing's bad, and it literally started getting used like that. So then it's like, let's mark slaves and we'll do this tattoo thing. Let's mark, if we go to like Frankel, let's mark prisoners of war,
Right. Right. The Nazis
right?
they definitely did that.
In Japan, let's mark all the criminals.
Hmm.
So penal tattooing. Now in Japan, they've got a really interesting culture that shows the how the change in charge from good to negative still was so significant and powerful that it got taken on, right? So we got these tattoos that say we're criminals, which is meant to shame us.
Hmm.
Okay, so tattooing's gone from elevating someone, celebrating them, to meant to be lowering and shaming them. But as a tool, it's just a really powerful thing. Doesn't matter who's wielding that sword, good or bad. So we've given the sword over to the criminals now. We've given it to the bad people, so to speak.
Hmm.
If you were someone who like felt shame, like sure, but if you were someone that was like a gangster, and now you got something that says you're a gangster, you're like, oh, look at this. People are scared of me because I got a tattoo. So in Japan, they started going like, well, I'll cover this one that says what I do with a flower, like the rest of their culture, or a wave,
Hmm.
and that turned into like the rest of their sort of artistry in Japan, their aesthetic. And they made these beautiful suits to the point where like the Yakuza can walk onto the street back in the day and they'd roll their sleeve up and you'd see their tattoos and the whole street would clear out.
Wow.
And so that's where we inherit tattoos are bad, is from that change, right? In that change, through multiple generations, we end up with tattoos are bad. It's the same here, probably same in the States. It's like there was stages of like tattoos are fringe, and the people that
Hmm.
get like really tattooed are like really on the fringe, or they're like pretty bad dudes
Hmm.
and
That's
gals.
fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah,
What
yeah.
a beautiful history. What an
Mm.
interesting history. Yeah, that's you've certainly done your work. That is fascinating.
Yeah, and so like that gets to a point of like where we are now.
Hmm.
So we've gone through this washing to tattoos have gone from good to bad to empty.
Interesting. Is
And
that where you
so
see
if I
them
think
now as
about the
being empty?
yeah,
Hmm.
well, I think the collective sort of perspective is a lot emptier. Like we said, inherently people will say they have meaning.
Hmm.
I don't ask a lot of people, and they say there's no meaning.
Hmm.
I'm like, yeah, the meaning's this, the meaning's that. Some people are like, they have no meaning at all, like the pendulum swing.
Hmm.
Um, but there's inherent meaning. But to get back to the strength or the substance that used to be there is kind of where I see the role of what it is that I'm doing and we're doing at the Tattoo Pathway, is trying to reinstill it. And so the analogy we use is like water at the source, rich, full of minerals, out of a spring, base of a mountain, um, into the hands of modern man, starts going through like reservoir catchments and pipes and all these types of systems. And so it gets quite like dirty and polluted.
Hmm.
Comes out your tap at home. You're like, if I'm going to drink this thing, I'm going to put it through a filter. So you put it through a filter, cleans it out, but cleans everything out. Now it's empty. And so we're at this like uh, remineralizing or reinstilling the worthiness of it.
Hmm.
What makes it worthwhile for someone? Really, why will you participate? So if someone comes in and asks for a tattoo, it's not a process of like sitting there and going like, yeah, well, you want to get it, that's good, we can do it. Let's get it here, make it a bit bigger, make it a bit smaller. It's just like, why do you actually want to get that? You know, and a bit
Mark,
of
this
a bit
your
of
work is
accompanying.
fascinating. I never, going through Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, I never thought I'd be having a conversation about meaningful tattoos. But as I said, I've always inherently just assumed that people, if you're going to go through this process and take the time and invest the money, that surely there should be meaning in it. But you're saying because of, and it's ironic you bring this up, like the proliferation, the growth of tattoo shops. I know just in my local community, every little town you go to, somebody has a tattoo shop. And I doubt they're asking these deep questions that you are about, what's the meaning behind this? Why do you want to do that?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, some of the old timers had a lot of like maxims or things that they went by that I think were really, really useful, and we're starting to lose them.
Mm,
Like there's value in almost any any established way of doing something. There's things that work and stick. So even in like some of the old school tattoo shops, I know especially in America, because it's got like an older contemporary history,
mhm,
like traditional tattooing, traditional Americana. And so there's things like, I can remember you wouldn't just tattoo someone's hands or their neck because they asked. There was a little bit of this gatekeeping that protected the person getting tattooed who's obviously ignorant to getting tattooed, and a bit of experience behind the artist of seeing it play out or experience it themselves. So like if someone came in and said, hey, I want a SpongeBob on my hand, um, I can picture these guys that I've learned from, um, these older fellas, and they'd be like, why would you get it on your hand? Look at your naked arms, mate. That's, put it somewhere else type of thing. You hold your horses,
mhm.
we'll get there. So there was like even at that stage, there was an understanding to a degree of like who do you think you are? You want to get a tough sticker, or what they used to call them job stoppers, right? So there was the stereotype was understood in a way that the tattooist could serve the public, if they wanted to, um, with some moral or ethical consideration. Whereas the emptiness and also the proliferation that you're talking about, so it's like it's gone from like the tattoo shop in the town to like 10 tattoo shops in a town,
Hmm.
and the competition and the drive and the ease of access again. So, like I said, there was that kind of layer of control from the bikers here.
Hmm.
I think that layer, that kind of like scary, mystical, fringe toughness created a boundary.
Sure.
And in some ways was withhold like sustaining a boundary that was also there probably in earlier cultures. So it wasn't the bad guy that held the boundary or the but it was still the fringe and the like not fully understood guy.
Hmm.
If it was like a chief or a medicine man or a shaman or whoever it was, it's like that person still in a way held a boundary where it's like, well, I probably won't go tattoo because I'm not that person. Whereas these days, it's like anyone can get a tattoo kit. It's easy thing to do. You don't need to do the grueling like apprenticeship or the
Yeah.
earning of the right anymore.
Yeah.
It's like I saw the other day, literally, you could buy the tattoo kit at Big W for $100.
In all honesty, I know in my area, I've seen some tattoos that look like they were done by $100 kit and somebody with very little artistic experience. And that's,
Yeah,
I think that's sad. And I often have to wonder, and I ask, what what made you go do that? And many people say, well, my friend got one, and here we were just sitting around drinking one day, and I said, yeah, go ahead and put this on my arm or put this on my body or something
mm.
like that. So what you're saying makes so much more sense, especially in the cultural heritage of tattooing. It makes a lot more sense that way.
Yeah. Well, like let's go into when you're working with someone, right? You said you always ask about their tattoos, okay?
Hmm.
And so, like from like a psychological lens and trying to understand someone's motivations and where they're at and something. If someone came in and they had a tattoo on their arm, and you ask them, they go like, "Oh yeah, I was just at a party and I was
Hmm.
drunk," and everyone thought it would be funny if someone got a SpongeBob tattoo. So I put my hand up to be that person, the center of the joke in
Hmm.
front of everybody and get the tattoo. It's like, what can you read in that?
Right.
Not the meaning they allocate.
Right.
From your layer of working, you get a different picture.
Right. Very much so.
Right. And then the thing that they don't fully understand or appreciate is that this mechanism or like the utility of the process that they're doing technically, which was understood in the past, is the process of locking in and recording the information at that point in time
Hmm.
so that you can carry it with you and so that it can bear weight on your movement forward. So what they've done is they've locked in that I'm the center of the attention and I'm the joke.
Hmm.
And then they're moving forward and that's having an outward and inward sort of relationship with themselves and their life. So
So often,
a lot of the
I mean,
time
that
that's
example, right? That example there would suggest a sad person who is familiar with being the butt of jokes, right? And some work to be
yeah.
done there, and maybe some self-esteem.
Yeah. Yeah, and like they're doing that to feel comfortable or to be accepted or
Hmm.
to disarm some of the stuff that's happening for them that might make them, not feel okay, or
Hmm.
there's layers to it that they probably haven't seen yet,
Hmm.
but the tattoo can point to it, right? Um, when I see that particular sort of archetypal story, it's usually the tattoo. And so here's another interesting thing is like where the tattoo lands on the body.
Okay.
So using that story, where do you think he would have got the tattoo or she would have got the tattoo?
Well, that makes sense, right? I mean, if you're going, yeah, you mentioned being on somebody's hand. What makes that significant in your work?
Where it lands?
Hmm.
Because there's different. The language I use is that there's different energetic sort of centers, and so when you tattoo on part of the body, you're working into that sort of signature.
Mm.
Waking something up would be like an old way of saying it. You're waking something up within that part of the person's being. Um, but there's all these different systems on the body. There's meridian systems, there's the circulatory system, there's the nervous system. And you start looking at the Eastern stuff, you have like the energetic systems with the chakras. So there's like all these systems, depending on what sort of layer of the body we're looking at, and whether it's like Western medicine or Eastern medicine. And so tattoos are a whole nother system that we consciously or not put into our body.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you start looking at the areas of the body and what it correlates to, which organs, which emotions, you can start to pull out a bit of a map as well. And so our case study there of the person that gets the tattoo as a joke drunk at a party
Mm-hmm.
is usually on the butt. They usually get it on their bum cheek
Wow.
because it adds to it. So it's like, oh, it's funny,
Mm-hmm.
but I want to hide it. And they're
Mm-hmm.
usually in this altered state. Where do I get it so that I can exacerbate the joke?
Mm-hmm.
I can hide it from myself, and I can hide it from the world. And so they pull their pants down and they get tattooed at the party on the couch.
Wow.
And so I've sort of labeled it the poison arrow or the poison dart,
Mm-hmm.
because I see it time and time and time again, like all the time. People come in with it, and again, if so, that's a contemporary sort of like pattern.
Mm-hmm.
Is that tattoo? Then we look at old cultures tattooing, and there's multiple cultures where one of their main rites of passage is to get from your hips down over your buttocks and over your thighs tattooed as one piece,
Wow. Why is that?
right?
Yeah.
Well, the explanation I've been given is because it's your place of power. Okay, so it's like it's the area that you're like it's your abdomen, your abdomen's there,
Mm-hmm.
your reproductive organs are there. That's where you sort of ground and pivot from if you were fighting, if you were dancing, if you were lifting.
Hmm.
It's a very potent place. It's this lower, in like Chinese, it's your lower dantian, or your
Mm-hmm.
upper dantian,
Mm-hmm.
or your sacral, your base chakras and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So it's this really potent area of power that gets marked and, like I said, woken up and brings you from, like, let's say, boyhood into manhood,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so I don't think it's like coincidence that in our contemporary culture, in this misunderstood way, someone who is lacking their power, they're not in their power at all. And that's sort of like putting themselves in a place of, how do I fit in? How do I make this happen? And they're kind of like putting themselves in the firing line, to sort of glean any of that. Ends up with this almost like a blow dart that they're giving themselves in their place of power that they carry around for the rest of, like, they're locking this thing in. So I mean, moving forward, the story that someone has, if they've got a tattoo there, usually is one of lacking power.
Mm-hmm. Again, I always felt there was a deep psychology behind tattoos, but you're definitely illustrating that so well today. That's certainly fascinating. Can we talk about some of your tattoos?
Yeah,
I'm
for
very
sure.
curious. I
Yep.
mean, the one I've been looking at this entire
This
conversation.
one.
Yes, what is
Yeah.
that on your neck?
Okay, I'll give you a good look. You tell me what you think it is.
It appears to be some kind of bug. Actually, that almost looks like the death's head moth from Silence of the Lambs.
Oh,
Am
Yeah,
I cl
nice.
am I
Uh,
close?
no, it's a cicada,
Okay.
but
That
I
would have
get
been
all
my
sorts of
fourth or
bugs.
fifth guess. It would have taken me a while to get there.
Yeah, nice.
Okay.
I got a bit of a wrinkly neck, so it's like it's changing rapidly.
Okay.
I joke with my wife that I'll probably be like a Shar one day. Just like, yeah, no,
So,
so that's a cicada.
uh-huh.
Um, yeah, I mean, so this is an interesting thing with the story of tattoos as well. It's like so you get them done and then you grow and you live and you change and you move away from it and being able to reflect on it
Hmm.
and hear your story and where you were at and allow the story to sort of grow and as you grow is one of the things that's really important, you know. Um, and so like I guess the initial point in time when I got it was 6 months after becoming a parent for the first time. So a lot of change. Me and my wife went from like traveling around most of our relationship. We're just like on the road a lot, in our camper.
Hmm.
The whole pregnancy, we were traveling around, and so we sort of stopped, pulled up, as you do when like you're about to become a parent. Like let's build a nest, get a
Hmm.
house, um, and then our first daughter arrived. She's 7 this year, so a little while ago. And then in that first 6 months, life changes very quickly. Yeah. So again, thinking of an initiation, these are the inbuilt ones, right?
Hmm.
Um, and so I guess I would have gone through in that first 6 months by paying really close attention and sort of taking the invitation of parenthood, um, gone through that initiation from like a boy's psychology,
Hmm.
you know,
Absolutely. I
and
say very often that, having a child is, you know it, I know it. Anybody who has kids knows it. It is the one thing in life that changes you the most, especially, I think, especially for us men. Um, yeah, parenthood changes us in dramatic and amazing ways.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So the point in time was that it was 6 months after Miena was born, um, but I specifically had like a bit of a grieving process, which is when the symbology came through of the cicada.
Hmm.
And so I guess there was an acknowledgement in me of the timing where it's like young me thought I was having kids and starting a family and it was going to look like this and it was for this reason and it was my choice. Okay, there was this like, I'm choosing to be a parent. And then there was, okay, I'm starting to come to terms with the radical change in what's required of me forever. I never get to do what I was doing before this child was born.
Wow.
Well, not for the first, that's how it felt, right?
Yeah, sure, sure.
At that point,
I
it's like,
remember those
I'm
days
never
too,
going to
and
sleep
sometimes
again.
still feel that way.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
I'm never going to sleep again. It's like, it's full on, right? Um, if I want to go to the toilet, I need to make sure someone else's eyes are on the baby, and it's
Hmm.
just my partner here. So it's like things change in a very radical way, and so there was this grieving and an acknowledgement, but then the love's so strong, like you wouldn't change it for the world, right? The
Right.
love's just like this love bomb just explodes,
Hmm.
and so there was me going like, the symbol of the cicada came in as this like they only come to the surface after whatever amount of years
Hmm.
living underground, and they won't come unless the environment is optimal for them to continue, right? For their life to continue,
Right.
to be able to breed. And so I just did a little bit of I guess like it was analogous of of Miena coming into my life, and she's coming through at the optimal time for her experience. It doesn't actually have to do with me, right? So it was like this acknowledging of the divinity of timing and that mechanism, and a little bit of acknowledging that it's not fully in my hands, even if I think it is. Um, And I think it was so impactful because I hadn't gone through a rite of passage
Hmm.
in the same way. So I think the feelings that came up for me and that I lent into, like, oh, I'm going to get this tattoo, probably would come up for people in their tattoo process in times gone by. Where it's like you're quite comfortable. You're kind of at the end stage of like your childhood.
Hmm.
So you're at the top of the childhood ladder. You're comfy, you know what's going on and whatever, and you could quite happily be there forever.
Hmm. Absolutely. And some men are.
Yep. But in these cultures where it's like you aren't actually going to contribute, in fact, you might impinge our entire society if you stay there. They're going to force you through a process that rattles you just as much as I guess that experience was for me, you know. And there'd be this mix of emotion too, because there's at the same time it's like everyone knows that's coming for them because
Hmm.
everyone in that group of people has gone through it. You know, so there's yeah, so that's why I got this one.
Hmm.
And it was hard actually because there was probably parts of me I think that moved in this direction that how would I frame it? um, there was probably like, so there was that point in time which was real, that's happening, but then in my psychology I probably picked this place from parts of me that were like, I don't know, drawing on things that I didn't fully understand as
Mm.
well, like the high visibility of it and missed expectations on things of like I'm allocating all this information and symbology to it, and then someone thinks it's a moth, or someone thinks it's the fly, or someone thinks it's a
Hmm.
cockroach. These things started to play on my mind, and so they put me through another layer of like stripping back of some of my own stuff over that 7 years,
Sure.
which has been really profound as well. Um, so that I can wear it in a way that I'm comfortable.
Right.
So
What a
yeah,
what a
that's
story.
that one.
It's a beautiful story. I'm
Mm,
curious now. The one I continue to see is on the palm of your hand.
yeah,
It looks. I have seen that image before, and I don't know what it is. It looks sort of like a globe, but it's not, is it?
it is. It
Is it?
is. Yeah. So it's a globe,
Hmm.
and so it's got like a halfway circle around it,
Hmm.
and then a quarter circle or a semicircle. You know. So this one, I got it when I turned 25,
Okay.
and my friend who did it, who lives in America now, is in Philadelphia. Um, I think I'd finished work. He was working in an old school tattoo shop where they kind of shut the doors at midnight, and he's like, "Oh, come to the studio, and then when I finish, we'll go out and get a beer or whatever." And I rocked up, and he shut the doors, and he's like, "Happy birthday! Pick one of these tattoos." And he had a bunch done, and they all represented the quarter, like 25 out of 100.
There we go. That makes sense.
Yeah. And so I picked this one, and he put it on my hand. It had flames that went up my fingers too. But this is the most painful tattoo I've ever got. So I think that took 40 minutes.
Mm.
And at the end of the 40 minutes, the flames had rubbed off. And I was like, yeah, let's not draw those back on.
Wow.
Um,
Okay. Yeah,
so
I was
that
curious
was
how painful that might be.
oh, it's very, very, very painful. It's a very different method to get a tattoo to stay into your palm.
Mm.
You got to go a lot deeper and a lot slower and whole nother technique.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, wow, Mark. Again, a fascinating conversation. I didn't imagine ever having a conversation about meaningful tattoos, but I'm so glad you found me and we talked about this. What's the message you want the audience to have? Your work at Tattoo Pathway? I mean, can you summarize that and share with the listeners? Like, what is it you want them to walk away with?
Yeah. I think the simplest the simplest thing is that there's more than just a tattoo.
Mm.
So again, if we think about that layer of the language and the allocation of like tattoos just a pigment in your skin, it's not just a tattoo. So that's why we've like pinned pathway to the end of it. So it's more than a tattoo. We see the tattoo as a pathway. And so when you're getting tattooed, just knowing that's kind of like this ongoing process, there's more to it. There's things that play out well before you get a tattoo that are valuable and worth paying attention to. And there's things that play out after a tattoo that are highly valuable and highly informative in terms of who you are and what your experience is. And that every tattoo is connected.
Mm-hmm.
So your first tattoo is connected to your second tattoo. They're not separate. They both live on the same person and are part of that person's story. So, yeah, people can kind of get tattoos and see them as these separate things.
Right.
I get that tattoo at that time, and I'm a different person now. I get a different tattoo,
Mm-hmm.
and they don't need to correlate, which just ends up fracturing people.
Mm-hmm.
They end up with these incongruencies in them. So I guess that there's more than just the tattoo. And like we said at the start, if we circle back, it's like if you want to have a meaningful tattoo, something that's truly meaningful in the context that you're probably talking about with a lot of people, something that's worth suffering for, or something that's worth living for, even like something that's worth living for, knowing that you're going to suffer for it, and like that's life.
Yeah.
That's life. It's also the tattoo experience. So if you want a meaningful tattoo, you need to be living a meaningful life.
Beautifully stated, Mark. Where can people find out more about you and your work?
Yeah, so the tattoo pathway is the website, tattoopathway.com. That's where we were running a course there this year, but next year it's just moving into a community space. So
awesome.
All of the coursework's there, but it's kind of just on the bookshelf, like behind you. And if you join the pathway, there's podcasts and resources, but the main sort of offerings a community space so people can have conversations about their tattoos, and a lot of the time just catch up with where they're at.
Mm-hmm.
So actually get a clear picture of what's going on with their tattoos before they move forward. And then I've got my own Instagram, which is the Mark of Nara. I'm pretty easy to contact. Like if people message me, I just have a chat with them.
Awesome.
So
awesome.
Yeah.
Well, check out the tattoopathway.com. Find out more about Mark's work and the research that they're doing there in Australia. And once again, this was a great conversation, Mark. Thank you so much for taking the time early Tuesday morning on my Monday afternoon.
Yeah. Yeah, no, thanks for taking the time to listen. Hey, do you mind if I ask if you have any tattoos before we finish up?
Sure, absolutely. I had a feeling that question might come up. I don't. And
Yeah.
the reason,
Okay.
um, I've looked, I've researched, I've looked at pictures. I love other people's art. To your point, I have never thought of something meaningful enough to put on my body.
Mm.
Or there are times when I think of so many meaningful symbols, yin yangs and crosses and compasses and things like that, that I think, how in the world would I put that on my body? I think about it often. I truly do, and just
Yeah.
have never went forward with it.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Are you okay if I share a little bit into that for you?
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Because it's really common. It's like one of the most common things is like in terms of like a barrier to tattoo entry for people,
Mhm.
is when it's like they are a deep thinking, feeling person. So the whimsical aspect doesn't resonate, and there's almost the apprehension because how could I get something today that I'd still feel the same way about in 10 years? And so they like paralyzes the process for them.
It's like you're reading my
And
mind.
yeah, and so there's like, well, you're not going to be the same person in 10 years.
Hmm.
You can't be. So you are going to change. Um, and so you will feel differently about the tattoo. So there's a layer of analyzing it where it's like, well, why are you doing it? And if you think of it as something that is, yeah, it's meant to record something at that point in time, the value is that you can reflect on it.
Mm.
Part of the value is like, so if I said to you, think about yourself 10 years ago, there'd be a flood of time and different memories that you try and lock onto to give you a clear picture. Whereas if I said, like you've said to me, think of these tattoos,
Hmm.
I'm revisiting that point in time almost to the hour.
Yeah.
And I get a really, really clear context of where I was at that point in time, which is really valuable in terms of reflection and navigation and stuff like that, right? So the point of it is to go like, okay, I'm gonna move into this process so that I can get value from it. Um, and again, our perspective of it is like artwork
Hmm.
tends to get a bit messy because we start going like, how do I make it fit with what I like the look of and all of these different things. Whereas anything initiatory is it's meant to move you from one state of being to another. So you're going to change anyway. And so the tattoo's just like a little bit of a tool you're using, knowing that you're going to change. Um, and it entails a little bit of like handing over a bit of that change. So if you do it in a way that's intentional,
Hmm.
you can be like adding a wind to your sail that even though you don't know who you'll be or where you'll go, with some, I guess, faith, or some type of like relationship with something beyond yourself, it's going to carry you to a better version of yourself. It's going to move you on a path of betterment, and you'll feel differently about it
Hmm.
for sure. Um, but think of it as information instead of art. That's a good way to do it. Like I'm
Interesting.
going to do a journal entry,
Mm.
and yeah. I think the design side of it, this is something that's like we're trying to work out, but is lacking. What the designs uh, need to look like in order to be sort of timeless.
Hmm.
This is part of our current context where it's the privilege almost stops us sometimes, or we can run away with ideas
Right.
too easily, right? Whereas I think being prescribed what you're going to get tattooed sometimes can be really useful. If you know why you're going to get it, you know, like let's
Yeah.
say we were together, we weren't across the world, and you were like, you know what, I've been thinking about this a lot, a hell of a lot, and it feels like it's the right time. Like I'm ready to do this thing, and to sort of like put this message out beyond myself. It's not to the rest of the world, even though they'll see it. It's more
Hmm.
like me putting out a flare saying like this is an important point in time and I want to acknowledge it. We'd work together on curating something that was appropriately going to represent that and wouldn't sort of shift through time. Like I see that little compass on the meaning
Hmm.
project in the background.
Yeah.
I'm like, that's great. That's perfect. Because it's simple. It's like you're not going with something that's like a trend or a fashion or a style, So it's like keeping it simple, you know.
I've always
It is
envisioned.
is what it is.
Yeah. Well, maybe I get on a plane here soon and head over to Australia to work. I mean, it's certainly, I know
Where are you in the States?
I am in, I like to call it Farmville. I am in the middle of northern Indiana.
Okay.
So maybe 2 hours
Northern
away from
Indiana, Farmville.
Chicago. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, nice. Yeah,
well,
I mean there's lots of good artists there.
mhm. I know it'll certainly be
Yeah.
on my mind and for a while now. And Mark, I promise, should I move forward with it, you'll be the first person I contact, and I'll let you know.
Great. Great.
Hey,
So good.
thank you. thank you for the analysis, and you are spot on. I mean, that's exactly where my head is, and so I appreciate that part of the discussion as well. And I know tattooing will be on my mind for a while. So thanks again. It
So
was a
good.
pleasure chatting
So
with
good.
you.
I appreciate you listening.
Absolutely, it was fascinating. Yeah, and should you ever put out more information and research, I'd love to talk about it again.
Cool, cool. Yep. Well, I hope your listener base get some value out of it, and yeah, welcome them all to reach out and have a chat if they want to know anything else. And
Awesome.
yeah, I'll give your work a share as well, mate.
Please do. Take care, Mark.
Yeah. Thanks so much.